I hate my father. His efforts to connect with me are pathetic. Oh my God.
Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm going to give you this can be pretty dry, just data, just facts, here's what's going on, and I will let you do the speculation. There's a lot of speculation that can occur over what I'm about to say, and a lot of kind of different outcomes people have, different feelings. It is, for what it's worth, I personally don't think there's a big sinister conspiracy here, but I'll give you that part at the end. I'm going to kind of separate this video into two parts. So part one, so what's going on with the comic sales numbers? So once upon a time, you could go to Comic-Con, you could get pretty reliable numbers coming out of Diamond. For what it's worth, there was always other sources, and this became the purpose of a lot of arguments back in 2016, 17. Hey, you're looking at these Comic-Con numbers and the sales look bad, but you're forgetting about digital, or you're forgetting about international, or you're forgetting about X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of those kinds of arguments. The Comic-Con numbers that would come out would track the Diamond numbers, and for a while that was fairly reliable. Now, for what it's worth, there's never been a legal obligation for Diamond to post the numbers. In fact, you could argue it was a little weird that that data was out there. We came to rely on it. We liked it. It was good to see it. But there was not. There's some people have speculated, hey, it's against the law not to show the numbers or hide the numbers. To the contrary, there's no obligation to make those numbers public. And if you think about other businesses, you do not see toy businesses or I'm trying to game companies. They'll report sales, but not usually at the granular level of detail that you got with the comics. The comics gave you unit shipped, and a ranking and everything else. And John Jackson Miller over at Comic-Con did a great job of putting it all together. The site's still pretty great for that time period, but it was discretionary for Diamond to put out those numbers. And I guess here I'll editorialize slightly. I don't think that it is. I don't think it is wrong or they are a bad company if they don't publish the numbers. I think it's up to them. They want to put them out, great. They don't want to put them out, great. It is, of course, I'd rather see them personally, privately. I'd rather see them, but I also, I would never, if I was suddenly in charge of the government, I would never force Diamond to publish those numbers. I mean, that would be a radical violation of privacy and somebody's business. So I think about it from that perspective, because for a lot of people, as I've gotten various emails and people sending me things, they're going, well, it's really a crime that Diamond isn't publishing the numbers, and so no, it's not. And you taken to an extreme, you could say that Diamond putting the numbers out there in the first place was out of the goodness of their hearts. Now that's not true at all, and that would be a very warped way of looking at it. But the point is, it wasn't required. Now, what happened in 2000 is basically DC jumped away from Diamond and went to Lunar, and so who else? There's one other one. I forget the other one's name now. But basically, they changed their distribution, and the second they did that, it basically took DC out of the mix. Now you had to get numbers from both companies, and you had to convince two companies, not one, to release the numbers publicly, and actually three, because DC picked two different distributors, and then settled on one. But immediately when they did that, the numbers became unreliable. Immediately, there was still a percentage of books that fell outside of the numbers that were being reported on Comic-Con, but as soon as DC jumped ship, it was over. At that point, the numbers ceased to be reliable. And relatively quickly, what happened was Lunar and others, and whoever this other company was, they weren't publishing the accurate numbers. And when they didn't publish the accurate numbers, Diamond's like, well, fuck it, why do we have to do that? And they stopped. And so you stopped getting the numbers being reported like you used to. Then, of course, Marvel and others went to Penguin Random House, further complicating the distribution. DC collapsed under just Lunar. And so, but basically, you had the numbers all over the place. Penguin Random House absolutely is not going to put out the numbers in that level of fidelity. And so you basically have no numbers, and you haven't had reliable numbers since March of 2020. You just haven't. So if you looked at any comic sales on these sites, keep in mind you're getting them with a grain of salt. Now, hang on a second. I'll do another aside. What about you, Perch? What about the sales analysis videos you do? Well, the majority of them are for runs for which there were reliable numbers being printed out by Comic-Con. Now, one of the things I do is one reason why I don't put out as many sales analysis as I think you guys would like is because it is a lot of work. What I typically did is I took the Comic-Con numbers and I cross-checked them against the publisher, and I would get numbers from them. So sometimes the publisher played ball, sometimes they didn't. I got a big dump of older numbers, which I'm feeding through and going on. Those are fascinating. I have the Secret Wars, the original one from the 80s coming up. But basically, I would cross-check those numbers. Now, I've done a couple sales analysis with numbers after 2020, but when I do those, I'm down to one source. I'm getting the numbers from the publisher. And every time I use them, I feel a little uneasy because they sometimes do not match. I like the world of being able to cross-check the diamond numbers with the publisher numbers and be able to get to a result. I like that world a lot better. Now, just going off one, I feel like the data is too easily manipulated or inaccurate. If I was a paranoid kind of person, I could say that I'm being, the numbers I get from the publisher are lies. That they're going to inflate things to paint a certain picture in their favor. I trust the people who are giving me the data, but all the same, I don't. It would be easy to manipulate. I like two sources. I think that's what they tell you in journalism. You're supposed to get multiple sources. Anyway. Now, you might also say, hey, wait a minute, Comic-Con was still putting out numbers after March of 2020. What gives? The numbers do seem different, though. And that's right, they were. Basically, the numbers became a kind of a formula that the Comic-Con, that John Jackson Miller and others used using Comic Hub data. So that was Comic Hub as a point-of-sale piece of software. It's not used by too many comic stores. It actually has a pretty small footprint. And it basically recorded what was being sold in shops. And then Miller did a pretty nifty equation to kind of come to an estimate of what the comic was being sold. I think that estimate was off. And I think the biggest flaw in it, and I'd love to hear, I should interview Miller at some point because I think that'd be a pretty fascinating discussion. My theory, and I may be wrong, perfectly willing to admit I'm way off here, but my theory is that the stores who use Comic Hub, they cater to a specific audience. They have a specific bend to the comics they sell, and I don't believe they're indicative of the wider market. I know a lot of the shops. I know a lot of the shop owners who use Comics Hub. They tend to they just tended to lean a certain way, and I don't mean that politically. I just mean their audience they catered to typically fit into a couple different demographics. It wasn't necessarily indicative of what was going on in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. So I just I didn't personally find that number reliable, but I was very thankful to Miller for basically doing his best to put something out there, and he wasn't hiding. I don't want anybody to take away from this that I think that Miller was doing something disingenuous. Not at all. He said exactly what he was doing. He put the math up front. He said, this is how I'm doing it. He showed his math, basically. I don't agree with some of the conclusions, but he was absolutely upfront with all of it. And I think, what else are you supposed to do? I appreciated him taking a shot at it. And I think the ranges were generally informative. I just think they were inflated in some areas and underrepresenting in others. But anyway, be that as it may. At this point, though, it's clear the numbers are never coming out. Diamond's not going to return to putting any kind of numbers out. Everybody's kind of retreated away from it. And why have they done that? Well, I think here's a basic answer. Here's more of a opinion answer. So the basic answer is they don't have to do it. It's work, so they don't do it. That's that simple. Why do something you don't have to do, especially if it takes you time and money and effort to do it? There's no point. My opinion answer, the other piece that flows into this, is that I think there's some nervousness among comic publishers and people at Diamond and people at the higher level. I'm not talking about the creators. I'm talking people higher up in management. I think there's some anxiety and some nervousness because the comics market, the Western comics market, is not performing as well as it should, and certainly not as well as the narrative that's come out. Remember, we've got several years now of comics are doing amazing, better than ever. This year was stronger than ever. Oh, some of that's manga. Oh, some of that's YA. Oh, so there's all these ways they kind of built up to the number to show strength. But I think the people who are actually seeing the numbers, seeing the actual data, they're not getting the same. They're not getting that picture. They're getting a different picture, a picture that is a little bit, certainly a lot more shaky where the Western comics business is concerned. And so I think that if you showed the math, I think it would pop that narrative pretty quickly. And so people don't. So I think that that's also become an incentive. I don't know about other companies. I know at least one company, Marvel, that leaned really heavily to stop putting the numbers out, and actually has for some time. But when DC bailed out and these other things happened, I think that tipped it. But Marvel did not want the numbers out, still do not want the numbers out. And this is on brand for Disney. Disney tends to be as secretive as possible about their finances and their numbers, who's going into the park, who's watching movies, etc. They tend to be very secretive about that. The way you ultimately have to get that information is by being a shareholder, getting their annual report, going through it, doing the work yourself, because they do have to. They are a public company, so they do have to report numbers, but they will make it hard for you. They'll put it this way: they're not going to volunteer the information like other companies. For what it's worth, Warner Media has tended to be more open, just as a cultural way of doing business. Now, I'm not saying which is better than the other. Of course, I like the open one better, but that's just kind of differences in kind of in the company DNA. But anyway, that's what's going on with the numbers. So as I said, a number of people have written saying, hey, what is going on? Why do we have good numbers? That's basically it. There's certainly more nuance to what I've said, and there's more detail. So if you go to ICV2 or Comicron, you can go there. You get the story, again, to Miller's great credit, he writes up what he's doing. He cites what he's doing there. So you could hear it from the horse's mouth. You could see exactly what he does and kind of the analysis he makes. And I still think what he does is highly valuable and informative as a general kind of here's what's going on in the industry, and here's more or less how things look. Put it this way: if you disagree with some of the analysis done with this site and you think it's too high, then forget about the actual numbers. Forget about the scale, and instead look at the comparison, the averages. Because let's say Miller has it cited there like Son of Kal-El sold 100,000 copies and Nightwing sold 150,000. Well, which he doesn't. But let's say he did. You could easily say to yourself, yeah, it didn't sell that much. That's nonsense. That's doing the math wrong. That's perfectly fine, and I think that would be reasonable to have that opinion. But what you can do is say, hey, this shows that Nightwing is outselling Son of Kal-El by whatever 50%. That you can still look at the ranges and get a good sense of where things are at, because even if the numbers are inflated, you still can have a general sense of how things are shaking out and where stuff's going. But anyway, there you go. Hope that's informative. And I guess that's it. Ask your questions in the comments below, and thanks for listening.